The lightning split the sky over Grass Valley, California in 1878, and Hannah Voss pressed herself against the general store wall so hard she could feel the rough wood bite through her dress. She had come west 3 months ago to escape a suffocating life in Boston, never imagining that the thing she feared most would follow her across a continent. "Miss, you all right?" The voice came from somewhere to her left, deep and steady despite the chaos of the sudden storm. Hannah could barely hear it over the hammering of her own heart and the rain that had begun pelting the boardwalk. Another crack of thunder rolled across the valley, and she flinched so violently she dropped her basket, canned goods spilling across the wet planks. "I'm fine," she managed, but her voice shook with the lie. She squeezed her eyes shut as lightning flashed again, bracing for the thunder that would follow. Instead, she felt warm hands on her shoulders. "No, you are not," the man said, and his voice was closer now, gentler. "Come on, let us get you inside before this gets worse." Hannah opened her eyes to see a tall cowboy with dark hair plastered to his forehead from the rain. His eyes were the color of pine trees in shadow, and there was something about the way he looked at her, concerned but not pitying, that made her legs decide to cooperate. He guided her into the general store, one hand steady at her elbow, the other collecting her scattered purchases as they went. Inside, the proprietor, Mr. Chen, looked up from behind his counter. "Storm came out of nowhere," he said, shaking his head. "Going to be a bad one, I reckon." As if to punctuate his words, thunder boomed so loud it rattled the jars on the shelves. Hannah gasped and stumbled backward directly into the cowboy who had helped her. His arms came around her instinctively, steadying her. "I apologize," she whispered, mortified. "I do not usually, I am not normally so." "Terrified," he supplied, not unkindly. He released her but stayed close. "Nothing to apologize for. Everyone has something that scares them." "Not something as foolish as thunder," Hannah said, wrapping her arms around herself. She could feel the trembling starting deep in her bones, the familiar panic that came with every storm. It had been this way since she was 7 years old, since the lightning had struck the oak tree outside her bedroom window and set their carriage house ablaze. Her mother had gotten her out safely, but the fear had never left. The cowboy studied her for a moment, then pulled a chair away from the checkerboard table in the corner. "Sit," he said. It was not a command but an invitation. When Hannah hesitated, he added, "Please. You look like you might faint, and I would rather not have to catch you." Hard on the knees at my age. Despite her fear, Hannah found herself almost smiling. "You cannot be that old." 27 next month," he said, guiding her to the chair. "Feels ancient some days." He pulled another chair over and sat facing her, close enough that his knees almost touched hers. "I'm Fletcher Brennan. Most folks call me Fletch. Hannah Voss." Another rumble of thunder, still distant but coming closer. She gripped the edges of the chair hard enough to hurt. Fletcher leaned forward, drawing her attention. "Look at me," he said quietly. "Not the window, not the door. Right here." Hannah met his eyes, those deep green eyes that seemed impossibly calm. "Tell me about Boston," he said. "You are from back east, I can tell from your voice. What brought you all the way to California? How did you know I am from Boston specifically?" Hannah asked, grateful for the distraction even as she heard the rain intensify against the roof. "Lucky guess. You have that proper way of speaking, and I have met a few Boston folks in my time." His mouth quirked up at one corner. "Also, your trunk at the boarding house has a Boston shipping label. I saw it when I was helping Mrs. Patterson move furniture last week. You are very observant. Part of the job." Lightning flashed, closer now, and Hannah tensed. Fletcher shifted his chair even nearer, blocking her view of the window. "What job, you are wondering? I run cattle for the Double J Ranch about 5 miles north of town. Been here 3 years now, came down from Oregon. Thunder crashed, so loud it seemed to shake the building's foundation. Hannah made a small, choked sound and found her hands reaching out without her permission, grasping Fletcher's forearms. He did not pull away. Instead, he turned his hands palm up and let her grip them, his thumbs brushing gently across her knuckles. "You are safe," he said, his voice low and sure. "I promise you, Hannah, you are safe right here." "I know it is irrational," she whispered, her eyes fixed on their joined hands because she could not bear to look up, could not stand to see judgment in his face. "I know the odds of being struck are infinitesimal. I know that being inside is safe. But my body does not seem to care what my mind knows." "Fear is not always rational," Fletcher said, "but that does not make it any less real." They sat like that as the storm raged overhead, Hannah clinging to this stranger's hands as if they were the only solid thing in a tilting world. Fletcher kept talking, his voice a steady anchor. He told her about the ranch, about the ornery bull named Samson who had a habit of opening gate latches with his horns. He described the stand of cottonwood trees by the creek where the hands liked to eat lunch in summer. He talked about his horse, a bay gelding named Rust who was smart as a whip but terrified of chickens. "Terrified?" Hannah asked, finding herself genuinely curious despite the storm. "A horse afraid of chickens?" "Absolutely terrified," Fletcher confirmed, and there was warmth in his voice now, almost laughter. "A rooster chased him when he was young and he has never forgotten it. Soon as he sees a chicken, he will practically climb a tree to get away. Made him useless for a while around the ranch until we figured out what was spooking him." "What did you do?" "Built him his own corral on the far side of the barn, away from the hen house. Cost me 3 days of work and a fair amount of ribbing from the other hands, but Rust is a good horse. Best I have ever had. Sometimes you accommodate the fear, sometimes you work through it, but you never just ignore it." Hannah realized the thunder had grown more distant, the intervals between lightning and sound lengthening. The worst of the storm was passing. Her hands were still locked around Fletcher's, and she became suddenly, acutely aware of how intimate this was, how inappropriate. She was holding hands with a man she had met 15 minutes ago, in full view of Mr. Chen who was tactfully pretending to inventory his stock of coffee beans. She started to pull away, but Fletcher's fingers tightened gently. "Wait," he said. "Just a moment more. Let it pass completely." So she waited, and he kept holding her hands, and when the thunder finally faded to a distant rumble and the rain gentled to a steady patter, Hannah felt as if she had run a great distance. She was exhausted and wrung out, but also strangely lighter. "Thank you," she said as she carefully extracted her hands from his. She could still feel the warmth of his palms against hers. "You did not have to do that. I know." Fletcher stood and retrieved her basket, now refilled with her purchases. "But I wanted to." He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "Miss Voss, would you allow me to walk you back to the boarding house? The rain is lighter now, but the streets will be muddy." Hannah knew she should decline. She had come to California to start fresh, to build a life of her own away from her overbearing aunt, and the society expectations that had suffocated her in Boston. Getting involved with a cowboy, especially one who made her feel safe in a way she had not felt in years, seemed like a complication she did not need. But when she looked at Fletcher Brennan, at his patient eyes and his steady presence, she found herself nodding. "Yes," she said. "I would appreciate that." The walk to Mrs. Patterson's boarding house took only 5 minutes, but Hannah was acutely aware of every second. Fletcher held an umbrella over both of them, which meant he had to walk quite close, his shoulder brushing hers. He matched his longer stride to her shorter one without comment, and when they had to navigate a particularly deep puddle, he offered his arm as naturally as breathing. "How long are you planning to stay in Grass Valley?" he asked as they walked. "Indefinitely," Hannah said. "I took a position as a teacher. The school term starts in 2 weeks, and I have 23 students enrolled already." "We need a good teacher," Fletcher said. The last one, Mr. Winters, was competent enough but had no patience for the younger children. "My boss's daughter Emma is 8, and she used to come home in tears most days. Broke my heart." There was genuine feeling in his voice, and Hannah felt something warm unfold in her chest. A man who cared about children's feelings, who noticed when they were hurting, that was not something she had encountered often. "I will do my best by them," she promised. "Teaching is the one thing I have always wanted to do, even when my family insisted I focus on finding a suitable husband instead." Fletcher glanced at her, something shifting in his expression. "No husband then?" "No." Hannah kept her voice light. "No prospects either, which was apparently a source of great shame to my aunt. Never mind that I am only 21 and perfectly capable of supporting myself. She seemed to think I would die an old maid and disgrace the family name." 21 is hardly ancient," Fletcher said, and there was a note of amusement in his voice. "Your aunt sounds exhausting." "That is an exceedingly diplomatic way to phrase it." They had reached the boarding house, a tidy 2-story structure with a wide porch. Fletcher walked Hannah to the door, shaking out the umbrella. "Will you be all right?" he asked. "The storm seems to have passed, but sometimes they come in waves." "I will be fine," Hannah said, though the thought of another storm made her stomach clench. "Thank you again, Mr. Brennan." "You were very kind, Fletch," he corrected. "And it was not kindness, not entirely." He met her eyes, and Hannah felt her breath catch at the intensity in his gaze. "Would you mind if I called on you sometime? Properly, I mean. I would like to get to know you better, Miss Voss." Hannah knew what the proper response was. She should demur, should say she needed to focus on her new position, should maintain appropriate distance. But standing there on the porch with rain dripping from the eaves and Fletcher looking at her like she was something precious, she found she did not want to be proper. "Hannah," she said, "if you are to call on me, you should use my given name. And yes, I would like that very much." The smile that crossed Fletcher's face was like sunrise, slow and warm and transforming. "Hannah," he repeated, as if testing how it felt. "I will come by Sunday afternoon if that suits you. Maybe we could take a walk, see some of the countryside. I would enjoy that." He tipped his hat to her, a gesture that should have seemed old-fashioned but instead felt courtly, respectful. "Until Sunday, then." Hannah watched him walk away, his long strides carrying him quickly down the muddy street. Only when he turned the corner did she go inside, where Mrs. Patterson was waiting with barely concealed curiosity. "That was Fletcher Brennan," the older woman said, peering out the window. "Fine young man. Works hard, goes to church regular, does not drink to excess. I have never heard a bad word about him." "We only just met," Hannah protested, but she could feel the flush rising in her cheeks. Mrs. Patterson smiled knowingly. "Sometimes that is all it takes. My Harold, God rest him, he knew within 10 minutes of meeting me that I was the woman he would marry. Took me a bit longer to come around, but he was patient." She patted Hannah's arm. "You could do far worse than Fletcher Brennan, dear. Far worse indeed." That night, Hannah lay in her narrow bed and listened to the distant rumble of thunder as another storm rolled through. Her hands clenched reflexively in the sheets, her heart rate picking up, but she found herself remembering Fletcher's voice, steady and calm. She remembered the feel of his hands holding hers, the absolute certainty in his words, "You are safe. I promise you." No one had ever made her feel safe during a storm before. They had told her she was being silly, or tried to logic away her fear, or simply left her alone to deal with it. But Fletcher had sat with her, had held her hands without judgment, had talked to her through the worst of it. Hannah pulled her quilt up to her chin and closed her eyes, and for the first time in 14 years, she fell asleep during a thunderstorm without crying. Sunday dawned clear and bright, the storm-washed sky a brilliant blue that hurt to look at. Hannah changed her dress 3 times before settling on a simple calico in a soft green that her friend back in Boston had said brought out the amber flecks in her brown eyes. She braided her chestnut hair and wound it into a neat coronet, then studied herself critically in the small mirror above her washstand. She looked nervous, which was ridiculous. It was just a walk, just an afternoon with a man who had been kind to her during a difficult moment. It did not have to mean anything more than that, except Hannah wanted it to mean more, which terrified her almost as much as thunder. Fletcher arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, driving a small wagon with a gentle-looking mare in the traces. He had clearly made an effort as well, wearing a clean shirt and a vest that brought out the green of his eyes, his dark hair neatly combed. "I thought we might drive out to Shadow Creek," he said as he helped Hannah onto the wagon seat. "It is only about a mile from here, pretty country. There is a spot where the willows grow thick along the bank, very peaceful." "That sounds lovely." They drove through town, and Hannah was aware of the looks they drew. Grass Valley was still small enough that everyone knew everyone else's business, and a new schoolteacher going driving with one of the well-regarded Cowboys was definitely noteworthy. Hannah tried not to think about the gossip that would inevitably follow. Once they left the town behind, though, the attention faded away. The road wound through rolling hills dotted with oaks, and the air smelled of grass and warm earth. Fletcher kept up an easy conversation, asking about her plans for the school, her impressions of California, whether she missed Boston. "Not as much as I expected," Hannah admitted. "I miss some people, certainly. My friend Margaret and my younger cousin Charlotte. But the place itself, the constant social obligations and expectations, I do not miss that at all." "What made you finally decide to leave?" Fletcher guided the mare around a particularly deep rut in the road. Hannah considered how much to tell him. But there was something about Fletcher that invited honesty, a quality of listening that suggested he genuinely wanted to know. "My aunt wanted me to marry a man named Cornelius Hartford," she said finally. "He is 43 years old, a widower with 4 children. He saw me at a church function and decided I would make a suitable replacement for his late wife. He did not care about my interests or my dreams. He wanted someone to manage his household and raise his children, and I happened to be conveniently available and adequately bred." Fletcher's hands tightened on the reins. "What did you want?" "That is the remarkable thing," Hannah said. "No one asked. My aunt assumed I would be grateful for the offer. After all, I was getting older and my prospects were supposedly limited. Mr. Hartford was wealthy and respected. What more could I want?" She looked out at the passing landscape. "So I took the money my mother left me, bought a train ticket, and answered an advertisement for a teacher in California. I left a note saying I was sorry, but I could not marry a man who saw me as nothing more than a convenient solution to his domestic needs." "Good for you," Fletcher said quietly. "That took courage, or selfishness, depending on who you ask." "Courage," Fletcher repeated firmly. "Knowing what you want and being brave enough to pursue it, even when everyone tells you not to, that is courage." They had reached Shadow Creek, and Fletcher pulled the wagon to a stop beneath a sprawling oak. He helped Hannah down, his hands lingering at her waist just a moment longer than strictly necessary, and led her toward the creek bank where the willows grew. It was indeed beautiful. The creek ran clear over smooth stones, and the willows created a kind of living curtain that filtered the sunlight into soft green gold. Fletcher spread a blanket he had brought under one of the largest trees, and they sat looking out at the water. "Tell me about Oregon," Hannah said. "What was it like growing up there?" Fletcher was quiet for a moment, and Hannah wondered if she had overstepped. But then he started talking, slowly at first and then with more ease. "My parents had a small farm in the Willamette Valley," he said. "Good land, but barely big enough to support a family. I have 2 older brothers, and it was clear the farm would go to them. So when I turned 19, I headed south to find my own way." He picked up a pebble and tossed it into the creek. "I've worked a dozen different ranches, learned everything I could about cattle and horses. Been in Grass Valley 3 years now, and this is the first place that has felt like home." "You miss your family?" "Sometimes," Fletcher admitted. "But we write letters and I send money when I can. My mother understands that some men are not meant to stay in one place forever, at least not until they find a reason to." The way he looked at her when he said that last part made Hannah's heart skip. "And have you? Found a reason, I mean?" Fletcher shifted closer, near enough that she could see the individual pine needle shades of green in his eyes. "I am beginning to think I might have." Hannah knew she should look away, should laugh it off, should maintain some semblance of propriety, but she found she did not want to. She wanted to sit here under the willows with this good, steady man and let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have something more than she had ever allowed herself to dream of. "Fletcher," she said softly, "we have known each other less than a week." "I know." He reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull back, and tucked a strand of hair that had escaped her braid behind her ear. "But some things you just know, Hannah. Some things you feel right down in your bones. Like being afraid of thunder." The words came out barely above a whisper. "Like knowing when something matters." His hand lingered near her face, not quite touching. "You matter. I felt it the moment I saw you pressed against that wall, trying so hard to be brave. And then you let me help you, and that took even more bravery." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes, though she could not have said exactly why. No one had ever spoken to her like this, as if her fears and her courage were 2 sides of the same coin, equally valuable. "I am scared," she admitted. "Not just of storms, of this, of what I am feeling. It is too much, too fast." "Then we go slow," Fletcher said simply. "I am not going anywhere, Hannah. I will be right here for as long as you need." They stayed by the creek until the sun began to sink toward the hills, talking about everything and nothing. Fletcher told her about the other ranch hands, the characters and personalities that made up his daily life. Hannah described her students, the children she had only met once but already cared about deeply. They discovered they both loved reading, though Fletcher's tastes ran toward adventure stories, while Hannah preferred novels about people and relationships. They debated the merits of California weather versus eastern seasons, whether horses or cattle were more intelligent, and what constituted the perfect meal. It was easy, Hannah realized. Being with Fletcher was the easiest thing she had ever done. There was no pretense, no performance, no wondering if she was saying the right thing or presenting the correct image. She could just be herself, and that seemed to be exactly who Fletcher wanted. When he drove her back to the boarding house as dusk was falling, Hannah felt as if she were glowing from the inside out. Fletcher helped her down from the wagon and walked her to the door, and this time when he looked at her, there was a question in his eyes. "May I see you again?" he asked. "Maybe Wednesday evening if you are not too busy with school preparations." "I would like that," Hannah said. Then, surprising herself, she rose on her toes and kissed his cheek, quick and light as a butterfly. "Thank you for today. It was perfect." She slipped inside before she could see his reaction, but through the lace curtain of the parlor window, she watched him touch his cheek where her lips had been, a smile spreading across his face that made him look years younger. Mrs. Patterson appeared at her elbow. "That boy is smitten," she said with satisfaction. Hannah could not stop smiling. "Yes," she agreed, "I believe he is." The week that followed was one of the happiest of Hannah's life. She threw herself into preparing the schoolhouse, arranging desks and stocking supplies, planning lessons that would challenge her older students while not leaving the younger ones behind. Fletcher came by Wednesday evening as promised, and they walked through town together, stopping to get lemonade at the general store where Mr. Chen greeted them both with a knowing smile. On Friday, Fletcher invited her to the ranch to meet his horse Rust and see where he worked. Hannah met his boss, a gruff but kind man named Jack Thornton, and Jack's wife Mary, who insisted Hannah stay for dinner. Their daughter Emma attached herself to Hannah immediately, chattering excitedly about how happy she was to have a new teacher who seemed nice. "She has not stopped talking about you since she heard you were starting next week," Mary confided as they cleared dishes after the meal. "You have already made an impression." That night, Fletcher drove Hannah back to town under a sky scattered with stars. They sat close together on the wagon seat, and Hannah found her head drifting to rest on his shoulder. It felt natural, right, as if they had been doing this for years instead of days. "I am falling for you," Fletcher said quietly, his voice almost lost in the clip-clop of the mare's hooves. "I know it is fast. I know it is probably foolish, but I want you to know. I am falling for you, Hannah Voss, and I do not think I could stop even if I wanted to." Hannah lifted her head to look at him, at this good man who had held her through a storm and made her feel safe. "I am falling too," she whispered. "And it terrifies me almost as much as thunder, but in a completely different way." Fletcher pulled the wagon to a stop, right there in the middle of the road with no one around for miles. He turned to face her fully, his hands coming up to cup her face with infinite gentleness. "Can I kiss you?" he asked. Properly this time, in answer, Hannah closed the distance between them. His lips were soft and warm, and he kissed her with a reverence that made her heart ache. It was not her first kiss. There had been a fumbling moment behind the church with a boy when she was 16, but it was the first kiss that mattered, the first one that felt like a promise. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing a bit harder, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. "I am going to marry you," he said. "Maybe not tomorrow or next week, but someday. I am going to marry you, Hannah, if you will have me." "Yes," Hannah said, though her practical mind was screaming that this was insane, that you could not decide to marry someone after knowing them for less than 2 weeks. But her heart, her stubborn, hopeful heart, was louder. "Yes, someday I think I will." School started the following Monday, and Hannah discovered that she loved teaching even more than she had imagined. Her students were a mix of ages and abilities, from 6-year-old Emma Thornton learning her letters to 17-year-old Samuel Wright, who was determined to learn enough mathematics to help run his family's mining operation. Hannah found ways to challenge each of them, to make learning feel like an adventure rather than a chore. Fletcher came by most evenings after his work at the ranch was done, and they would walk together or sit on Mrs. Patterson's porch and talk. The town had fully accepted them as a courting couple, and Hannah found she did not mind the knowing smiles and well wishes as much as she had expected to. 3 weeks after they met, the weather turned. Hannah woke one morning to dark clouds massing on the horizon, and her stomach immediately clenched with dread. By afternoon, the storm was clearly going to be severe, and she dismissed school early so the children could get home before it hit. "Are you going to be all right, Miss Voss?" Emma asked as she gathered her slate and reader. You look worried." "I will be fine," Hannah assured her, though her voice shook slightly. "Just make sure you get home quickly, all right." The first drops of rain began to fall as Hannah was locking the schoolhouse door. She hurried toward the boarding house, but she had only made it halfway when the sky opened up in earnest. Within seconds, she was soaked through. And then the lightning came, brilliant and blinding, followed almost immediately by thunder that seemed to shake the very ground beneath her feet. Hannah froze in the middle of the street, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She could not move forward or back, could not think beyond the overwhelming terror that had her in its grip. The rain plastered her hair to her face and her dress to her body, but she barely felt it through the panic. Then there were hands on her shoulders, a familiar voice cutting through the roar of the storm. "Hannah, Hannah, look at me." She managed to focus on Fletcher's face, rain streaming down his cheeks. He must have seen the storm coming and come looking for her. "I cannot," she gasped. "I cannot move, I cannot." "Yes, you can," Fletcher said firmly. He pulled off his coat and draped it over her head and shoulders, creating a small shelter. Then he scooped her up in his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. "I have got you. You are safe. I am not going to let anything happen to you." He carried her the rest of the way to the boarding house, moving quickly but carefully, shielding her body with his as much as possible. Mrs. Patterson was waiting on the porch, her face creased with worry. "Get her inside," she said, holding the door open wide. "I will bring towels and hot tea." Fletcher carried Hannah directly to the parlor and set her down on the sofa, still wrapped in his coat. He knelt in front of her, water dripping from his hair and clothes, and took her freezing hands in his. "Breathe," he said. "In and out, nice and slow. Stay with me, Hannah." Another crash of thunder, and Hannah flinched so hard she nearly fell off the sofa. Fletcher caught her, pulled her forward into his arms, and held her tight against his chest. "I have got you," he murmured into her wet hair. "I am right here. You are safe." Hannah buried her face in his shoulder and clung to him, her fingers twisted in the wet fabric of his shirt. The storm raged outside, shaking the windows, but Fletcher held her through all of it, one hand stroking her back in long, soothing motions while he whispered reassurances. "You are the bravest woman I know," he told her. "You left everything you knew to build a new life. You stand up in front of a classroom every day and shape young minds. You are so much stronger than you think." "I do not feel strong," Hannah whispered against his neck. "I feel like a child." "Strength is not about never being afraid," Fletcher said. "It is about doing what you need to do even when you are terrified. And you are doing it, Hannah. You are getting through this." Mrs. Patterson came in with towels and tea, took one look at the scene, and quietly backed out again. The storm lasted for over an hour, and Fletcher held Hannah through every minute of it. He held her until the thunder faded and the rain gentled, until her shaking stopped and her breathing evened out. He held her even after she had calmed, his arms a steady presence around her. "I am sorry," Hannah said finally, pulling back enough to look at him. His shirt was soaked where her face had been pressed against it, and she felt mortified at how she had fallen apart. "I am sorry you had to see me like that." "Do not apologize," Fletcher said, and there was something fierce in his voice. "Do not ever apologize for being human, for being afraid. I told you before, Hannah, I am going to be here for you. Through every storm, no matter what. I meant it then, and I mean it now." Hannah looked at him, at this man who had left his work to come, find her in the rain, who had carried her to safety without a second thought, who held her through her terror without judgment. And she realized that what she felt for him had moved beyond falling. She was already there, already in love with Fletcher Brennan in a way that was absolute and terrifying and wonderful all at once. "I love you," she said, and watched his eyes go wide. "I know it has only been 3 weeks, I know it is too soon, but I cannot hold it in anymore. I love you, Fletcher." The smile that broke across his face was like the sun coming out after the storm. "I love you too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "God, Hannah, I love you so much it scares me. I have loved you since the moment you let me hold your hands in the general store." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, and Hannah kissed him back with everything she had. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know I said someday, but I do not want to wait. Marry me, Hannah. Let me spend the rest of my life holding you through every storm." Hannah's practical side tried one last time to assert itself, tried to point out all the reasons this was rushed and impulsive and potentially unwise. But her heart, that stubborn, hopeful heart, knew better. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married 4 weeks later on a bright October day with not a cloud in the sky. Hannah wore a dress she and Mrs. Patterson had made together, simple white muslin with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Fletcher wore his Sunday best, and looked so handsome when he turned to watch her walk down the aisle that Hannah felt her breath catch. The whole town turned out for the ceremony, which was held at the small church on the edge of Grass Valley. Jack and Mary Thornton stood as witnesses, and Emma insisted on being the flower girl, scattering autumn leaves down the aisle instead of petals since flowers were scarce this time of year. When Reverend Matthews asked if anyone objected to the union, there was only supportive silence. And when Fletcher slipped a simple gold band on Hannah's finger and promised to love and cherish her all the days of his life, Hannah felt tears of joy slip down her cheeks. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Matthews said, beaming. "You may kiss your bride." Fletcher did not need to be told twice. He pulled Hannah into his arms and kissed her soundly, and the congregation erupted in cheers and applause. The reception was held at the Thornton Ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food contributed by what seemed like everyone in town. There was roasted chicken and fresh bread, apple pie and corn pudding, fiddle music and dancing under strings of lanterns as evening fell. Hannah danced with Fletcher until her feet hurt, then danced some more. She was pulled away periodically by well-wishers who wanted to congratulate her, by students who were excited to see their teacher so happy, by Mary Thornton who hugged her tight and whispered, "Welcome to the family." As the night grew late and guests began to drift home, Fletcher found Hannah standing at the edge of the celebration, looking up at the stars. He wrapped his arms around her from behind and she leaned back against his chest. "Happy," he murmured against her hair. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Hannah said honestly. "I keep thinking I am going to wake up and find this is all a dream." "Not a dream," Fletcher promised. "This is real and it is ours." They spent their first night as husband and wife in a small cabin that Jack Thornton had given them as a wedding gift. It was only a mile from the main ranch house, close enough that Fletcher could still do his work, but far enough to have privacy. Mary had furnished it with hand-me-down furniture and curtains she had sewn herself, and there were wildflowers in a vase on the table. Fletcher carried Hannah over the threshold, a tradition he insisted on despite her laughing protests. He set her down gently in the middle of the main room and just looked at her for a long moment. "My wife," he said wonderingly. "I have a wife." "I have a husband," Hannah replied, and the word felt strange and wonderful on her tongue. "Fletcher Brennan, you are my husband." They came together in the middle of the room, kissing with a new urgency now that they were finally alone, finally wed. Fletcher's hands were gentle but sure as he began working the buttons of Hannah's dress, and Hannah felt no fear, only anticipation. He made love to her with the same care and attention he had shown in everything else, taking his time, making sure she was comfortable. It was awkward in places, as first times often are, but it was also sweet and tender and utterly perfect. And when they lay tangled together afterward, Hannah pressed against Fletcher's side with his arm around her. She felt completely and utterly safe. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. Fletcher pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I love you too. And I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt it." The first months of marriage were an adjustment, though mostly a joyful one. Hannah continued teaching, riding into town each day on a gentle mare that Fletcher had bought for her. Fletcher worked the ranch, rising before dawn and often not returning until after dark. But they always made time for each other, for quiet dinners and evening walks, for lying together in bed and talking about their days. They learned each other's rhythms and habits. Hannah discovered that Fletcher was grumpy in the mornings, until he had his coffee, that he liked to read by the fire in the evenings, that he sang slightly off-key when he was happy. Fletcher learned that Hannah needed quiet time to herself after a long day of teaching, that she braided her hair when she was anxious, that she made the best cornbread he had ever tasted. The first big storm of their marriage came in late November. Hannah woke to the sound of thunder in the distance and immediately felt her heart begin to race. Beside her, Fletcher stirred and pulled her close. "Storm coming," he murmured sleepily. "I know." Hannah's voice was small, and she hated how frightened she sounded. Fletcher was fully awake now. He shifted so he was facing her, his arms securely around her. "I am right here," he said. "I have got you." The storm hit hard, wind howling around the cabin and rain lashing the windows. Lightning illuminated the room in brief, brilliant flashes, and the thunder that followed seemed to shake the very foundation. Hannah buried her face in Fletcher's chest and tried to breathe, tried to remember that she was safe, that the cabin was solid, that nothing bad was going to happen. "Talk to me," she gasped out between crashes of thunder. "Please, just keep talking." So Fletcher talked. He told her about his plans for expanding the herd next spring, about a conversation he had had with Jack about possibly buying into the ranch as a partner someday. He described in detail the new calf that had been born last week, all knobby legs and huge eyes. He recited from memory passages from one of his adventure books, his voice never wavering even when the storm was at its worst. And Hannah held on to him and let his voice be her anchor. It was still terrifying, still awful, but it was bearable because Fletcher was there, keeping his promise to hold her through every storm. When the thunder finally faded, and the rain settled into a steady patter, Hannah realized she was exhausted. But it was a clean exhaustion, not the drained, shaky feeling she usually had after a bad storm. "You did so well," Fletcher said softly, stroking her hair. "I am so proud of you." "I was terrified," Hannah said. "I know, but you got through it. And I will be here for the next one and the one after that, for as long as you need me." "Forever," Hannah said. "I am going to need you forever." Fletcher smiled against her hair. "Good, because that is exactly how long I plan to stay." Winter settled over Grass Valley, bringing cold, clear days and the occasional dusting of snow. Hannah loved watching the ranch transform under frost, everything glittering like it had been touched by diamonds. She grew closer to Mary Thornton, who became something of an older sister to her, and to the other ranch hands' wives who welcomed her into their circle. Christmas was a joyous affair, with the Thorntons hosting a gathering for everyone connected with the ranch. Hannah gave Fletcher a new pair of leather gloves she had saved for weeks to buy, and he gave her a beautiful wooden box he had carved himself, lined with velvet for storing her most precious things. "It is beautiful," Hannah breathed, running her fingers over the intricate design he had carved into the lid. "When did you find time to make this?" "Late at night when you were already asleep," Fletcher admitted. I wanted you to have something special." Hannah threw her arms around him and kissed him in front of everyone, not caring who saw. She was happy, truly happy, in a way she had never been in Boston with all its rules and expectations. Spring came, and with it the rains. There were several storms that had Hannah clinging to Fletcher in their bed, her heart pounding and her breath short. But each time, Fletcher held her and talked her through it, and each time it was a little bit easier to bear. In March, Hannah realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another week to be sure, then another, hope and excitement building in her chest. Finally, she worked up the courage to tell Fletcher. She made his favorite dinner, pot roast with potatoes and carrots and apple pie for dessert. Fletcher ate with his usual appreciation, complimenting her cooking and telling her about his day. It was only after they had finished eating and were sitting together on their small sofa that Hannah took his hand. "I have something to tell you," she said, her heart hammering. I am fairly certain that I am with child." Fletcher went completely still, then his head whipped around to stare at her, his eyes wide. "What? You are sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor," Hannah said. "I have missed 2 courses, and I have been feeling queasy in the mornings, and certain smells that never bothered me before are suddenly unbearable." "We are having a baby," Fletcher said, his voice full of wonder. Then louder, "We are having a baby." He pulled her into his arms and held her so tight she could barely breathe, laughing and crying at the same time. "Hannah, we are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Hannah asked, even though she could see that he was. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Fletcher said. He pulled back enough to cup her face in his hands, his eyes shining with tears. "You have given me everything, Hannah, everything I never even knew I wanted." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Hannah continued teaching through the spring term, though she had to take breaks more frequently as she grew tired more easily. Fletcher became almost comically protective, hovering and fretting in a way that was equal parts endearing and exasperating. "I am not made of glass," Hannah said one evening as Fletcher helped her sit down for the 3rd time in as many minutes. "I know," he said, "but you are carrying my child, and I will be damned if I let anything happen to either of you." Mary Thornton laughed when Hannah complained to her. "That is how they all are with the first one," she said. "Jack practically wrapped me in cotton wool when I was carrying Emma. Just let him fuss. He needs to feel like he is doing something useful." Hannah took her advice and let Fletcher fuss. She let him rub her swollen feet in the evenings and help her with tasks that were becoming awkward as her belly grew. And when the storms came, as they inevitably did, she let him hold her and keep his promise. There was one particularly bad storm in May, with hail pounding the roof and lightning that seemed to strike so close, Hannah could smell the sharp ozone sent through the walls. She was beside herself with fear, shaking so hard her teeth chattered, but Fletcher was there, solid and real and unshakable. "You are safe," he kept saying. "Our baby is safe. I am not going to let anything hurt either of you." And somehow, incredibly, Hannah believed him. She believed him because he had never once broken his word to her, had never once failed to be there when she needed him. Their son was born on a clear July day, with Mary Thornton acting as midwife and Fletcher pacing a hole in the ground outside. It was long and painful, but when Hannah finally heard that first angry cry and felt her baby placed on her chest, every moment of pain was forgotten. "A boy," Mary said, her voice warm. "A big, healthy boy. Congratulations, Hannah." Fletcher was allowed in a few minutes later, and he approached almost hesitantly, as if afraid to break the spell. Hannah smiled at him through tears of exhaustion and joy. "Come meet your son," she said. Fletcher knelt beside the bed, his eyes fixed on the tiny red face of his child. With shaking hands, he reached out and touched one miniature fist, and the baby's fingers immediately curled around his thumb. "Hello, little one," Fletcher whispered. "I am your papa. I have been waiting so long to meet you." They named him James, after Fletcher's father, with the middle name Thomas after Hannah's grandfather. Little James was a good baby, healthy and strong, with his father's dark hair and his mother's brown eyes. Fletcher was completely besotted, spending hours just watching the baby sleep, marveling at his tiny fingers and toes. Hannah returned to teaching in September, bringing James with her in a basket that she kept beside her desk. The students were fascinated by the baby, and the older girls took turns helping to watch him during recess. It was unconventional, but this was the frontier and allowances were made. Life settled into a new rhythm. Fletcher continued working the ranch, and true to Jack Thornton's hints, he was offered the chance to buy a partnership stake. It took nearly all their savings, but it meant security for their family, a real future. James grew from an infant to a toddler, a sturdy little boy who was fearless and curious about everything. When he was 2, Hannah discovered she was pregnant again, and 9 months later their daughter was born. They named her Catherine, called Kitty for short, and she had her father's green eyes and a temperament as sunny as a summer day. The years passed in a blur of happiness. Fletcher and Hannah built a life together that was everything both of them had ever wanted. They expanded the cabin, adding rooms for their growing family. Fletcher became a full partner in the ranch, and Hannah became known as one of the best teachers in the region. Through it all, the storms still came. Hannah never fully conquered her fear of thunder, though with each passing year it became a little more manageable. But Fletcher never wavered in his promise. Every single time a storm rolled through, he was there, holding her, keeping her safe, reminding her that she was not alone. "I am terrified of thunder," Hannah said one night when James was 5 and Kitty was 3, the words familiar from years of repetition. "I know," Fletcher replied, pulling her close as lightning flashed outside. "And I will hold you through every storm for the rest of our lives." And he did. When James was 12 and Kitty was 10, Hannah gave birth to another son, whom they named William. Fletcher joked that they were starting a second family, but his joy was no less than it had been with their first 2 children. As the children grew, Fletcher made sure each of them knew how to work hard, how to be honest, how to treat others with respect. He taught James and William to ride and rope, to understand cattle and land management. He taught Kitty the same things, despite some raised eyebrows from more traditional neighbors, because he believed everyone should know how to take care of themselves. Hannah watched her children flourish under Fletcher's patient guidance and felt her heart swell with love. This man who had held her through a storm that first day had given her everything she never knew she needed. A home, a family, a partnership built on love and respect and absolute trust. There were hard times, of course. The year the drought nearly destroyed the herd, forcing them to sell off stock at a loss and scrape by on thin margins. The winter Kitty got scarlet fever and they took turns sitting up with her for 3 days straight, terrified they might lose her. The day James, at 16, was thrown from a horse and broke his arm so badly it took months to heal properly. But through all of it, Hannah and Fletcher faced it together. They were partners in every sense of the word, supporting each other through every challenge, celebrating every triumph. When James turned 18, he announced his intention to go to agricultural college in Sacramento. Hannah was proud but sad to see her firstborn leave, and Fletcher looked like someone had punched him in the gut. But they gave their blessing because they had raised their children to be independent, to pursue their own dreams. "I will come back," James promised the day he left. This is my home, and the ranch is my future. I just want to learn everything I can so I can make it even better." Kitty, at 16, had developed a passion for teaching and spent her free time helping Hannah at the school. "I want to be a teacher too, Mama," she confided. "Just like you." William, at 9, declared he was going to have the biggest cattle operation in all of California someday, and no one doubted him for a second. The years continued their steady march. James did come back from college, full of new ideas and modern methods that he and Fletcher implemented on the ranch. He married a girl named Alice from a neighboring ranch, and they gave Hannah and Fletcher their first grandchild, a little girl named Rose. Kitty went away to teachers' college, but returned to Grass Valley to teach alongside her mother. She eventually married a quiet doctor named Samuel who had moved to town, and they had twin boys who were the terror and delight of everyone who knew them. William stayed on the ranch, working side by side with his father and older brother, and eventually married a spirited redhead named Margaret who could rope a steer as well as any man. Hannah and Fletcher grew older together, their hair turning gray, their bodies not quite as spry as they once were. But their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened with each passing year, becoming something richer and more precious than either of them had imagined possible. They celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a party attended by what seemed like the entire county. Their children and grandchildren filled the ranch house, along with friends they had accumulated over 3 decades of life in Grass Valley. That night, after everyone had gone home and they were alone in the house they had built together, Fletcher pulled Hannah into his arms and held her close. 30 years, he marveled. It feels like both forever and no time at all. "I know," Hannah said, resting her head on his shoulder, a gesture as familiar as breathing after all these years. "Sometimes I still think about that first day when you found me terrified in the storm." "Best storm of my life," Fletcher said, "brought me to you." As if in response to his words, thunder rumbled in the distance. Hannah tensed reflexively, decades of instinct impossible to completely overcome, but Fletcher's arms were already tightening around her. "I have got you," he murmured, the words he had said hundreds, maybe thousands of times over the years. "I am right here." And he was. Through 30 years of storms, literal and metaphorical, Fletcher had never once broken his promise. He had held her through every single one, just as he had said he would on that first day. Hannah lifted her head to look at the man she loved, this good, steady man who had given her the world. His hair was more gray than dark now, and there were lines around his eyes and mouth, but when he looked at her, she still saw the same love, the same devotion that had been there from the very beginning. "I love you," she said. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Fletcher replied, "and I will keep holding you through every storm for as long as I live." The thunder rolled closer and the rain began to fall, but Hannah was not afraid. She was home, safe in the arms of the man who had promised to hold her through every storm and had never once failed to keep that promise. They stood together at the window, watching the lightning flash across the sky, and Hannah felt nothing but peace. The little girl who had been so terrified of thunder all those years ago had grown into a woman who knew that no storm could truly hurt her, because she was never alone. Fletcher had promised to hold her through every storm, and he had. For 30 years and counting, through sunshine and rain, through joy and sorrow, through every challenge life had thrown at them, he had been there. Her rock, her anchor, her home. And as the storm raged outside and they held each other close, Hannah knew with absolute certainty that this was what love looked like. Not just the passion of those early days, though that had been wonderful. Not just the partnership they had built, though that was precious. But this deep, abiding certainty that no matter what came, they would face it together. The years continued as years do. There were more grandchildren, then great-grandchildren. The ranch prospered under James's management, with William as his partner and Fletcher serving as advisor and consultant. Kitty's school became known as one of the best in the region, and her twin boys grew up to be a lawyer and a newspaperman. Hannah and Fletcher gradually stepped back from the daily work of running the ranch and the school, though they never truly retired. There was always something to do, grandchildren to spoil, advice to give, a life to live together. When Fletcher was 65, he had a health scare that terrified Hannah more than any storm ever had. He had been working too hard, pushing himself too much, and his heart had given him a warning. The doctor ordered rest and taking things easier, and for once Fletcher listened, because he could not bear the fear in Hannah's eyes. "I am not ready to leave you," he told her as they sat together on the porch one evening, watching the sun set over the hills they loved. "I still have so many more storms to hold you through." "Then you had better take care of yourself," Hannah said fiercely, gripping his hand, "because I am not ready to let you go either." Fletcher recovered fully, and he kept his word about taking things easier. They spent more time together, taking slow walks around the property, sitting in the garden Hannah had cultivated over the years, reading together by the fire in the evenings. It was a good life, a full life, the kind of life that both of them had dreamed of but never quite believed they would have. They had built something beautiful together, not just in their children and grandchildren, but in the way they had loved each other, steadily and truly, through every single day of their marriage. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their family threw them a massive celebration. The ranch was filled with people, multiple generations of Brennans and their extended family, friends and neighbors from all over the county. There were speeches and toasts, laughter and tears, music and dancing. But the moment Hannah treasured most came late in the evening when Fletcher pulled her away from the crowd to walk under the stars. They ended up at Shadow Creek, at the same spot where they had sat on their second date, beneath the willows that were now ancient and gnarled. "You remember?" Fletcher asked, his arm around her shoulders. "I remember everything," Hannah said. "Every moment, every word, every storm you held me through." Fletcher turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Even at 67, his grip was still strong, still steady. "I meant it, you know. When I told you I would hold you through every storm, I meant it then, and I mean it now, and I will mean it until the day I die." "I know," Hannah said, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You have proven it 1,000 times over. You are the best man I have ever known, Fletcher Brennan, and marrying you was the best decision I ever made." They kissed there beneath the willows, two people who had loved each other for 40 years and would love each other for however many more they were given. And when thunder rumbled in the distance, they simply held each other closer, knowing that together they could weather any storm. Fletcher and Hannah lived to see their 50th wedding anniversary, a milestone they celebrated quietly with just their immediate family. By then, Fletcher's health was declining, his heart not as strong as it once had been, his body finally showing the wear of decades of hard work. But his mind was sharp as ever, and his love for Hannah had not dimmed one bit. He still reached for her hand every time they sat together, still kissed her good morning and good night, still told her he loved her multiple times a day. "I am so grateful," he told her one evening as they sat together watching another sunset. "For every moment we have had, for every storm we weathered together, for this life we built. I would not change a single thing." "Neither would I," Hannah said, though her heart ached because she could see him fading, could feel time running out. "You gave me everything, Fletcher. Everything I needed, everything I wanted, everything I never even knew to dream of. You did the same for me, he said softly. I was just a cowboy with nothing but some skill with horses and cattle. You made me into a husband, a father, a better man than I ever thought I could be. That night, a storm rolled through, one of the worst of the season. Thunder shook the house and rain pounded the roof, and lightning flashed brilliant and blinding. Hannah, at 72 years old, still felt her heart race at the sound, still felt that old familiar fear rise up. But Fletcher, as he had for 50 years, pulled her close. His arms were not as strong as they once had been, his body frailer, but his presence was just as solid, just as reassuring. I have got you, he whispered, as he had whispered so many times before. I am right here, my love. You are safe. Hannah buried her face in his shoulder and held on, and Fletcher held her back, keeping his promise one more time. They stayed like that all through the storm, two people who had loved each other through half a century of life, still finding comfort in each other's arms. When the storm passed and the morning came, clear and bright, they were still holding each other. And Hannah knew, with the certainty that comes from a lifetime of love, that no matter what happened, no matter what storms still lay ahead, they would face them together. Because that was what love was. Not just the excitement of those early days, not just the passion and romance, though those were wonderful. Love was this, the steady, enduring commitment to hold each other through every storm, to be there in the hard times as well as the good, to build a life together one day at a time. Fletcher Brennan had promised to hold Hannah through every storm, and he had kept that promise for 50 years. And Hannah knew, as she looked at the man who had been her everything for half a century, that she would carry that promise forward for whatever time remained to them. They had built something beautiful together, something that would outlast them in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch they had helped build, in the school where Hannah had taught generations of students, in the countless lives they had touched. But most of all, they had built it in each other, in the love that had started with a terrified woman and a kind cowboy during a storm, and had grown into something powerful and unbreakable. A love that had weathered every storm life threw at them and come out stronger on the other side. And as they sat together watching the sunrise after the storm, their hands intertwined, Hannah knew that this was the true happily ever after. Not perfection, but partnership. Not the absence of fear, but the presence of someone who would hold you through it. Not a life without storms, but the certainty that you would never have to face them alone. Fletcher lived another 3 years after their 50th anniversary, 3 good years filled with family and love. When he finally passed, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Hannah was holding his hand. And even though her heart broke at the loss, she was grateful, so grateful for every moment they had shared. She lived for 10 more years after Fletcher's death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of whom carried forward the legacy of love and commitment that she and Fletcher had modeled. And when storms came, as they inevitably did, she would close her eyes and remember the feel of Fletcher's arms around her, the sound of his voice telling her she was safe. He had kept his promise. Through every storm of their life together, he had held her. And even after he was gone, the memory of that love, that steadfast devotion, continued to hold her. When Hannah passed away at the age of 85, surrounded by 3 generations of family, she went peacefully with a smile on her face. Her last words were, "I am coming, Fletcher," and everyone who heard them knew that she was finally going home to the man who had loved her through every storm. They buried her next to Fletcher in the cemetery overlooking Grass Valley, under a sky that was clear and blue and perfect. And on the headstone, beneath their names and dates, the family had inscribed the words that had defined their love, through every storm together. It was a legacy that lived on in their descendants. This idea that love meant showing up, meant keeping your promises, meant holding each other through the hard times as well as the good. James passed it on to his children, who passed it on to theirs. Kitty taught it to her students along with reading and arithmetic. William built his life and his ranch around it. And sometimes, when storms rolled through Grass Valley and thunder shook the windows, people swore they could feel the presence of Fletcher and Hannah Brennan, two souls who had loved each other so deeply that not even death could break the bond. Their story became part of the town's folklore, told and retold through generations. The terrified young teacher from Boston and the kind cowboy who had promised to hold her through every storm. The promise that had turned into a lifelong love, a partnership that had weathered every challenge and come out stronger. It was a reminder that true love was not just about the easy moments, the sunshine and clear skies. It was about standing together when the storms came, about keeping your promises even when it was hard, about building something that could withstand whatever life threw at you. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy Fletcher and Hannah left behind. Not just their children and grandchildren, not just the ranch and the school, but the example of what love could be when two people committed themselves fully to each other, through every storm for all the days of their lives.